All right. So let me ask you something. What does it mean when senators are calling for a president to be removed from office, not through elections, not through waiting for term to end, but right now, through 25th Amendment?
So guys, according to today's video, I want you to imagine this particular scenario, and then you let me know in the comment section below. I want you to imagine being one of the biggest defense contractors in the United States of America, where billions in government contracts exist, and also there is guaranteed demand, and there has been decades of influence in America's government that is by the same contractors. So now the president is coming in and saying that, you know what, it's either you change or you just lose everything. And of course, that is not a rumor. We're not talking about rumors, by the way. It's not a speculation. It's an ultimatum that is coming out of the president's mouth. So let's listen to these videos and then we come back and continue with the analysis.
Donald Trump and his team just spent a week at Davos delivering a very specific message. Globalism is a failure. Europe is irrelevant. We're not fighting your wars. The post-war order is dead, and the real America is back. Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, and Trump himself were relentless in ripping globalism to pieces. But while the media obsessed over their rhetoric, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth quietly released the 2026 National Defense Strategy on January 23rd, and that document is the real hammer blow. For 80 years, American foreign policy was written by the British. From the Cold War to NATO to the endless wars after 1989, this was all designed to keep nations locked in permanent conflict so the imperial elite could maintain control. America was the enforcer, we were their dumb giant. The new NDS throws that out the window. Here's the key paragraph. We will defend the homeland and ensure that our interests in the Western Hemisphere are protected. We will deter China in the Indo-Pacific through strength, not confrontation. We will increase burden sharing with allies and partners around the world, and we will rebuild the U.S. defense industrial base as part of the president's once-in-a-century revival of American industry. Now, this document explicitly states that the security of the U.S. homeland and the Western Hemisphere is now our primary concern, not China, where, as you saw, the language shifted from strategic competition to strength, not confrontation. And the usual saber-rattling over Taiwan, gone. Well, the British noticed. And even more shocking to the geopolitical establishment, Russia is now described as a persistent but manageable threat to NATO's eastern members. Did you catch that? A threat to NATO's eastern members, not necessarily to the United States. And the Washington Post got that message. What does this add up to? The revival of the Monroe Doctrine. The Western Hemisphere is now the foundation of American national defense. Not Europe, not the Pacific, but our neighborhood. And the Department of War isn't waiting around. Immediately after the NDS dropped, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane announced something unprecedented. On February 11th, he's convening military leaders from 34 Western Hemisphere nations. The mission? Take down Dope Incorporated, the narco-terrorist networks that have been a favorite weapon of the British Empire since the Opium Wars. That's why Maduro was captured. That's why Venezuela, Colombia, and other countries are being given the opportunity to free themselves from the cartels. And the February meeting will bring the rest of the hemisphere into the fight. Trump didn't just ruffle feathers at Davos. He ended 80 years of British-written American foreign policy. No more permanent great power enemies. No more regime change abroad. No more color revolutions funded by USAID. No more American blood and treasure spent enforcing the empire's rules-based order. They had no choice but to activate domestic assets. The Trump administration announced the end of the post-war order, and the empire knows it. And that's why they're suddenly channeling Lord Palmerston, the original color revolution mastermind, who spent decades trying to stop the American system from spreading. They couldn't beat us through their rules-based order, so they're reaching back 170 years for the playbook that preceded it. Which brings us back to Minneapolis. This isn't spontaneous outrage over immigration enforcement. This is a Palmerston operation, professional color revolution tactics imported from Britain 40 years ago nurtured by globalist money and now deployed against a sitting U.S. president. The same people who ran regime change in Ukraine and Syria are running operations in Minnesota. Rachel Sayre told you so herself. But the new NDS shows we know their game, and this time we're not playing by their rules. The British establishment wants you to think America is the new empire. In fact, Chatham House is even hosting a seminar called The New Threat of Imperial America. Think about that. The headquarters of the British imperial establishment is accusing America of being imperial for refusing to fight their wars. Now, Promethean Action is doing more than just exposing all this. We're building a movement that can defeat it by understanding and backing President Trump's strategic and economic revolution. If you want to be part of that fight, join us at Promethean Action as a supporting member or a contributor. This has been your Monday Brief. Thanks for watching.
He also proved that his Defense Department is not an ordinary Defense Department. Raytheon, he said, he threw down, said Raytheon better get their act together, stock buybacks. See, they take these large contracts, this government money, and then they turn around and give it to their shareholders without doing the job. It's a racket. And Trump called him out on it strong.
What are the characteristics of ICE and how do they compare with other organizations of a sort of paramilitary nature?
So in lots of parts of the world, there are paramilitary forces that are supposed to serve the guy in charge rather than institutions. And the warning signs to watch out for are firstly that you have a force that is outside the normal command and control structure of the police and the military. Secondly, they tend to be paid better than they could get in any other line of work to keep them loyal. Then they tend to be, whereas normal police or military are supposed to be impartial, the paramilitaries will be very partial, possibly ideological. And then most importantly of all, they will tend to be above the law, not de jure, but, if the opposition jaywalk, they get arrested. If the paramilitary forces kill someone, it may be that nothing happens. The hurdles that you have to jump through to qualify to work for ICE is basically have a pulse. The benefits, you get up to a $50,000 signing bonus, full federal benefits, bonuses for arresting people. There's a lot of people making good money doing this. Secondly, the ideological thing. You saw the recruiting video. There's much worse things than that. Official ICE websites are saying it's kind of Trumpism on steroids. It's saying America is being invaded by criminals and predators. We need you to get them out. College degree not required. It's saying, either you really agree with the Trump agenda or this is not the place for you to work. And then I see we've just got this stuff up here. These are some of the things that they're putting out on social media. And this is even worse. Now, a lot of people looking at this, they don't see anything particular, but look at the one in the top right-hand corner. We'll have our home again. To most people, that sounds, meh. But, that is a white supremacist song. It's extremely well known to people who know these things. The one in the top left-hand corner with the Uncle Sam at the Crossroads, that was put out by ICE with the catchphrase, "Which way, American man?" which is an allusion to a neo-Nazi book from the 1970s. Now, if they were doing this sort of thing just maybe once, they happened to get a phrase that happened to be a white supremacist phrase, you might think it was an accident, but they're doing it all the time, which makes you think it's deliberate.
Here's what just happened. President Donald Trump has invoked the Defense Production Act of 1950 for strategic minerals, not as a possibility, not as a proposal, but as active executive policy that is already being implemented across the United States government. On January 7th, 2026, Trump signed Executive Order prioritizing the warfighter and defense contracting, which explicitly authorizes the Secretary of Defense to use, quote, available enforcement actions under the Defense Production Act to secure critical materials for national defense. But that's not all. In March 2025, Trump signed Executive Order 14,241, immediate measures to increase American mineral production, which invoked Defense Production Act Titles 3 and 7 specifically for minerals. And in May 2025, Trump issued a presidential waiver that expanded DPA authority to include, quote, minerals without the normal congressional approval requirements because of the national energy emergency he declared in January 2025. And now, as of this week, industry insiders are reporting that the Department of Defense, working with the United States International Development Finance Corporation, is preparing to execute the largest strategic mineral acquisition in American history. The target? Silver. The amount? 500 million ounces. And the method? Direct purchasing agreements, offtake contracts with domestic producers, and if necessary, priority allocation that gives the military first access to all domestically produced silver. This is not a theory. This is not a rumor. This is policy. And it's being executed right now. And if you're a civilian trying to buy silver, if you're a dealer trying to source inventory, if you're an investor trying to protect your wealth, you need to understand that the rules of the game just changed forever. If you're here because you want the truth, if you're done being lied to by the mainstream media that will never cover this story, hit subscribe right now and drop a comment, even just our John AG. Because what we're about to expose is the single most important development in the precious metals market in 50 years. And it is happening in real time, while the world is distracted by stock market headlines and political theater. Let's start with the weapon itself. Because most people have no idea what the Defense Production Act actually is, or what it allows the president to do. And that ignorance is dangerous, because this law, this Cold War relic from 1950, gives the President of the United States more power over the economy than almost any other statute on the books. The Defense Production Act was signed into law by President Truman in September 1950 to enable the government to respond to the industrial and economic requirements of the Korean War. But it's been reauthorized dozens of times since then, and every time it's reauthorized, the scope gets a little wider, the powers get a little broader, and the definitions get a little looser. As of right now, the DPA has been extended through September 2026. That means Trump has this tool in his hands for at least another 8 months, and he's already shown that he's willing to use it aggressively. So what does the DPA actually allow him to do? Let me break it down. Title I of the DPA authorizes the president to require industry to accept and prioritize contracts and orders to promote national defense. That means if the Department of Defense says, "We need your silver," you have to give it to them, and their order goes to the front of the line, before your other customers, before the private market, before civilian demand. The military gets priority, period. This is enforced through something called the Defense Priorities and Allocation System, or DPAS. When a contract gets a DPAS rating, it becomes mandatory. You cannot refuse it. You cannot delay it. And if you don't comply, the government can penalize you, suspend your operations, or even take control of your facility. Title III of the DPA authorizes the president to provide loans, loan guarantees, purchase commitments, grants, and other financial assistance to businesses to expand productive capacity and supply for national defense purposes. That means the government can essentially buy out the entire production of a silver mine before it even comes out of the ground. They can sign offtake agreements that lock in supply for years, and they can subsidize new mining operations to increase domestic production, with the stipulation that all of that production goes to the government first. According to the Congressional Research Service, Trump has Executive Order 14,241 delegates these Title III authorities to the CEO of the United States International Development Finance Corporation. That's the DFC. And the DFC has been authorized to use Department of Defense investment authorities, including the DPA, and the Department of Defense Office of Strategic Capital, to establish a dedicated mineral and mineral production fund for domestic investments. In plain English, that means the DFC can spend billions of dollars buying silver, directly, right now, without asking Congress for permission, because Trump already gave them
the United States secret weapon that isn't so secret anymore. The Department of War posting this on X today, writing, quote, "Yes, the Department of War has directed energy weapons. Yes, we are scaling them. These weapons were claimed to be used in the capture of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela." The White House press secretary posting an account from a Venezuelan security guard protecting Maduro, revealing how American forces wiped out hundreds of fighters using a technology unlike anything he had ever heard or seen. News Nation's Katie Pavlich asking the president about the use of this weapon in her exclusive interview.
Speaking of Venezuela, there was a weapon used, a sonic weapon, that took out many of the Cuban bodyguards that were used to defend Maduro. Lots of people saw the details about that weapon and were concerned. Is that something that Americans should be afraid of, something the United States is combating?
Yeah, something I don't want to, nobody else has it. We have weapons that nobody knows about. And I say it's probably good not to talk about it, but we have some amazing weapons. That was an amazing attack. Don't forget, that house was in the middle of a fort, an army base, a big one, a lot of soldiers, and they came in and They did their job. We lost nobody.
Now, the United States leads in the overall development of this technology. Unclear when it may be used next.
President Trump says a massive armada is headed to Iran. A US aircraft carrier and 3 destroyers arrived in the Gulf this week, and that made the oil price jump. Brent crude has just hit $70 a barrel for the first time since September. Why? Some traders think the US could try to block Iran's oil exports, just like it did with Venezuela. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. A third of the world's seaborne oil goes through this narrow stretch of water. The US naval forces could disrupt commercial shipping in the Gulf. Iran has also repeatedly threatened to close the strait itself. It seized a tanker with its crew back in December. An oil blockade on Iran risks a sharp rise in global energy prices. It would also be expensive and difficult to maintain. Iran has the world's third largest oil reserves, behind only Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. It exported about 1.9 million barrels a day in December, 90% of it to China. US sanctions mean there aren't many other buyers. The end of those sanctions would mean a flood of extra oil supply and lower prices. But Iran isn't Venezuela. Arab and Israeli officials say the US is unlikely to be able to change the government with a quick intervention or airstrikes alone, and in the narrow space of the Gulf, the odds of a military miscalculation are high.
The authority under the National Energy Emergency Declaration. And Title VII of the DPA grants the President authority to conduct industrial base assessments to obtain information from private industry. That means the government can demand that you report how much silver you have, where it's stored, who your customers are, and what your production capacity is, and you have to tell them. It's not optional. This is the legal framework that Trump has activated. And it's not theoretical. It's not a contingency plan. It's happening right now. According to a CSIS analysis from March 2025, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Ben Black, Trump's nominee to head the DFC, are playing significant roles in determining the future of U.S. critical minerals production. They are using Department of Defense investment authorities to execute a dedicated mineral fund. And silver is at the top of the list. Now let's talk about why. Why is the Trump administration, why is the Department of Defense suddenly treating silver like a national security priority? Why are they willing to invoke emergency powers to secure 500 million ounces of this metal? The answer is simple. Silver is the most critical metal in modern warfare, and the United States doesn't have any. Let me repeat that. The United States has no strategic silver stockpile. Zero. The last of the government's silver reserves were depleted in 2002, when the final 165 million ounces were sold to the Treasury to make American silver eagles. Since then, the U.S. has been entirely reliant on imports to meet its defense and industrial needs. And here's the problem. The U.S. is between 64 and 80% import reliant for silver, according to the United States Geological Survey. Most of that silver comes from Mexico, Canada, Chile, and Peru, and most of the refining capacity that turns raw silver ore into usable metal is controlled by China. China processes somewhere between 60 and 70% of the world's refined silver. So the United States, the world's largest military power, is dependent on foreign countries, including adversarial nations, for the metal that powers its entire defense industrial base. That is a strategic vulnerability, and Trump knows it, Hegseth knows it, and the Pentagon has been screaming about it for years. Now, you might be thinking, but how much silver does the military actually use? Isn't that exaggerated? No, it's not, and the numbers are staggering. According to multiple defense industry analyses, every modern weapon system relies on silver. Virginia-class submarines use tens of thousands of ounces per vessel. Tomahawk cruise missiles, the workhorse of U.S. precision strike capability, contain significant amounts of silver in their guidance systems, electronics, and ignition batteries. Some reports claim each Tomahawk contains between 10 and 500 ounces, depending on the model and classification level. The exact number is classified, but the Department of Defense has acknowledged that silver is embedded in critical components. Fighter jets use silver in their radar systems, avionics, and electronic countermeasures. Drones use silver in their circuit boards and communication systems. Satellites use silver in their solar panels and thermal control systems. Night vision goggles, which are standard issue for U.S. infantry, use silver oxide batteries. Even nuclear weapons use silver in their triggers and detonation systems. But here's where it gets really scary. The U.S. defense industrial base is burning through munitions faster than it can replace them. According to a House Select Committee on China War Games simulation, in a conflict with China, the United States would expend its stock of advanced missiles and bombs in less than 1 month. And the country would run out of some critical weapons in a matter of days. The replenishment curve is brutal. Even with emergency funding, inventories of Tomahawk-class weapons, Patriot PAC-3 missiles, long-range anti-ship missiles, and SM-6 missiles take years to rebuild. Why? Because these are complex systems with fragile supply chains, and all of them require silver. Fresh reporting from October 2025 shows the Pentagon urging prime contractors and subcontractors to double to quadruple output across a dozen munitions lines to prepare for a China contingency, because current stockpiles are too low for a prolonged fight. But you can't double missile production if you don't have the silver to build them. And right now, the US doesn't. The global silver market is in deficit. Industrial demand exceeds mine production by over 200 million ounces per year. And China, which controls most of the refining capacity, just implemented the most aggressive export controls in history on January 1st, 2026. So the Trump administration looked at this situation and said, we have a problem. We cannot fight a war without silver. We cannot rebuild our munitions, stockpiles without silver, and we cannot rely on foreign suppliers who might cut us off in a crisis. So we're going to secure our own supply by any means necessary. And that's where the 500 million ounce target comes from. 500 million ounces is roughly...
We have some news right now. Donald Trump just admitted that he is suing the federal government to settle with himself. And probably one of the most corrupt statements you'll hear, but really no one's batting an eye. So on Air Force One, he's speaking to a press gaggle. He said about his multiple lawsuits against the federal government, he's suing the IRS right now for $10 billion. He said, quote, I'm supposed to work out a settlement with myself. We can make it a substantial amount. Nobody would care because it's going to go to numerous very good charities. So he's suing the federal government. Then because the federal government is himself at this point, he is then working out a settlement for himself, picking a number that he wants and pocketing that number and saying that he's going to numerous charities. One of those charities is probably the Donald Trump Presidential Foundation to build his presidential library. But he is suing the government for $10 billion. That is your money. That is your money, by the way, taxpayer dollars. And no one's batting an eye. Spread the word because I think people need to know about it and follow along, stay up to date on all the news that you need to know about. There'll be much more to come very soon.
All right. So let me ask you something. What does it mean when senators are calling for a president to be removed from office, not through elections, not through waiting for term to end, but right now, through 25th Amendment, through building impeachment case, through any constitutional means available, when Senator Ed Markey is urging Trump's cabinet to invoke the 25th and remove him, when multiple Democrats are calling Trump mentally ill, unfit to lead, and clearly out of control, when Republicans are breaking with Trump on Venezuela war powers, on DHS funding, on tariff threats, when Trump's having profanity-laced calls with GOP senators who dare defy him, yeah, that means Trump's losing it. And senators want him removed now. And honestly, this is unprecedented for second term. President who once survived 2 impeachments through Republican loyalty, now facing chamber where even his own party is exploring constitutional off-ramps. Constitutional tools designed to stop dangerous president, and they're doing it publicly, not quietly grumbling, but on record, calling for removal, blocking his agenda, defying his orders, and creating possibility that Trump could be removed before 2026 elections, not through impeachment conviction necessarily, but through combination of 25th Amendment pressure, cabinet revolt, Senate rebellion, and political isolation that makes him unable to govern. And here's why this matters so much, because senators don't call for presidential removal lightly. 25th Amendment is for presidents who are incapacitated, who can't perform duties, who are danger to country. And Markey's saying that's Trump right now. Based on his Greenland obsession, based on his text to Norway's prime minister saying because he was denied Nobel Peace Prize, he no longer feels bound to focus on peace when pursuing control of Greenland. That's president making foreign policy based on personal grievance, making military decisions based on being snubbed for award. And Markey's saying that's mental illness. That's unfitness. That's danger. And cabinet should remove him under 25th Amendment before he does something catastrophic. So let's walk through the 25th Amendment calls specifically. Senator Markey led this, publicly urged cabinet to invoke 25th based on Trump's Greenland Nobel text. And he wasn't alone. Multiple House Democrats joined, Rep. Yasemin Ansari, Rep. Sidney Kamlager-Dove, others, all publicly calling for Trump's removal via 25th, calling him mentally ill, unfit, out of control. And that language, it's not hyperbole, it's diagnosis, it's lawmakers saying, we've seen enough. This president is danger, and constitutional mechanism exists to remove dangerous presidents, and we should use it. And the Greenland Nobel connection is revealing because Trump's been obsessed with Greenland, wants U.S. to control it, has made it foreign policy priority, despite Denmark saying absolutely not, despite international law prohibiting it, despite it being completely unrealistic. But Trump won't let it go, keeps pushing. And when he was denied Nobel Peace Prize, he texted Norway's PM, said because of that denial, he no longer feels bound to pursue peace in Greenland efforts. That's president saying, I wanted award, didn't get it. So now I'll pursue my Greenland obsession through force if necessary, through aggression, through whatever means, because personal grievance about award trumps peace. And that's insane. That's president making policy based on ego, based on being snubbed, based on personal feelings rather than national interest. And senators are saying that proves unfitness, proves he shouldn't have nuclear codes, shouldn't have military command, shouldn't be president, and cabinet should recognize that, should invoke 25th, should remove him before he starts war over Greenland because he's mad about Nobel Prize. And Republicans are breaking with Trump too, not on 25th Amendment, but on war powers, on Venezuela. 5 Senate Republicans initially joined Democrats on resolution to rein in.
You realize the impact of what Trump has just done? He has just taken China, who already has been really investing in infrastructure and technology and growth instead of military power like we keep accusing them of. And he is just, with his tariffs and with his turning his back on all of our other trading partners, he has just launched China into the stratosphere as far as their economic power around the world. Because as we have turned our back on our allies, China has gone in there to be the good guy. Now we're the bad guy, they're the good guy. And what he just did with Canada is Canada now, because we've turned our back on Canada, he gave them a reason to go deal with China. Canada never had a good reason not to deal with China, but they kind of iced them out for the past several decades because they were following Washington, D.C.'s leads. Washington, D.C. was saying, don't deal with China. And so Canada kept very cool relations with China. Well, now, after the U.S. has kind of iced out Canada with all of our stupid ass tariffs, Canada has sought out a replacement for the trade they can't do with the U.S., and they have now brokered a deal with China. It has now made China the second largest trading power with Canada and the third largest investor in Canada. So what have you just done, Trump? You claim that we're America first, but you just gave China, your big nemesis, a massive fucking foothold in the Western Hemisphere, literally with Canada, our northern border. So instead of making America great again, he made China great again.
Breaking news. In a stunning 5-4 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court has granted Donald Trump board wartime authority under the 1798 Aliens Enemies Act, empowering him to carry out massive deportation. So we understand. In other news, Trump is changing ICE to NICE, meaning National Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Wow. NICE agents all day, every day. And remember this, if we repelled the 22nd Amendment so Trump could run a third term, he is mentally sharper than ever. Would you VOTE him in? Smash the heart and say, hell yes, absolutely. B, no way. If you drop a heart, we get this all over the FYP so everybody could see this. I would appreciate it. Stay blessed. More news coming soon. Trump all day, every day.
There will be less support for US allies, according to the Pentagon's new national defense strategy. Trump came, he promised, and he sort of delivered. There's a new one of these reports released just about every election term, and the reports usually give us an insight into what the USA are planning with their foreign policy. This one sticks to the vision that Trump set out in his campaign, a lesser involved USA. Sort of. It said that allies need to step up, saying that partners have been content to let the US do all of the heavy lifting. To the defense of the US, the report has a point. Before Trump came in, the USA was doing the heavy lifting when it came to the defense of Ukraine. And of NATO, some countries were not even achieving the minimum spending required. Trump's America is fed up of this. He says, you've enjoyed the ride, but now the bill is due. At times, the report does feel like it was written with Trump watching over, One line reads, "Trump is courageously putting Americans first to make America great again." The report has called on Europe to take the lead against threats that are less severe for the US, but more so for Europe. And with this, we imagine the report is referring to Russia. The US has been keen to get involved diplomatically to find a peace deal for Russia and Ukraine, but has reduced its military donations. And I say donations because the US weapons are still going to Ukraine, but rather than them being gifted, they're being sold to NATO and then NATO gift them. Trump gets to call this good for the American taxpayer. He can also show Russia that the US is not so involved in Ukraine, even though it still technically is. And of Russia, the Pentagon report describes Russia as a persistent but manageable threat to NATO's eastern members. Perhaps one of the biggest changes, though, is the report's wording on China. Previous versions of the strategy referred to China as a top defense priority. Now it says relations with China should be met with strength, not confrontation. And for more detail, the report says that the goal is not to dominate China, nor to humiliate them. Rather, it is to prevent anyone, including China, from dominating the US. Strangely diplomatic. The report also said it would offer limited pushback for North Korea, a big change from Trump's original stance on North Korea. Fire and fury, you might recall. The report says that South Korea is capable of taking primary responsibility, but North Korea has nuclear missiles, South Korea does not. Some in South Korea may therefore ask, are we now allowed to make it an even playing field? You might be tempted to call this an isolationist document. No, says the report. Instead, the report says that its strategy is realistic and describes its approach as a common sense one delivered by President Trump. Of course, as we all know at this point, what is written and what is done are different things. Trump came in saying no foreign wars and no interference. He has since struck Iran and Somalia and Nigeria and Syria and put a Venezuelan leader in a US jail. Even his fans, like the co-leader of the German AfD party, complained that Trump is interfering in reference to talk of taking Greenland. The report's talk on China may also not be too different from Trump's earlier approach. For example, last year, the US announced a vast arms sale to Taiwan worth $11 billion. And after that, China carried out huge military drills around Taiwan in response. For now, leaders of Russia and China may welcome the report nonetheless. It is a less confrontational, more diplomatic one, and talks of strength while not being a bulldozer. You could almost argue, in the eyes of Russia and China, that it's fair. It may also please Trump's fans, who can point to the report as evidence that Trump's America is doing what was promised on the campaign trail. Look, Europe could have been doing more. NATO ought to have pushed its members for higher spending a long time ago. But other areas of the report are more questionable. South Korea has often been discouraged from developing nuclear weapons itself in return for US help. China can also point to US tariffs, AI chip regulation, and deals with Taiwan as a sign that the US is still sticking to business as usual. As I often say with Trump, don't watch what he says, watch what he does instead.
With everything going on domestically, a lot of people seem to be unaware that Donald Trump wants to invade Mexico. That's not hyperbole. Right now, the Trump administration is trying to put U.S. troops, Army and Marines, on the ground in Mexico so that they can bring a hot war to the cartels. And to be clear, this is not a statement from the DHS or the DEA. This is not a Coast Guard or law enforcement action. They're talking about taking the strikes, the illegal strikes, the war criminal strikes that they're doing in the Caribbean right now, and they're going to take that kind of kinetic force and do it within the borders of Mexico. The destabilization of Latin America is going to create an immigration crisis. And this here is the feedback loop that feeds fascism. So you've got Trump, Pete Hegseth, Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio conspiring to create a hot war on the United States border. And these guys honestly believe that if Hellfire missiles are landing just south of the United States border, just over the border from Texas, that there is not going to be violence that spills over that border. And they're trying to declare war against narco-terrorism without authorization from Congress to invade our southern neighbor, which is going to provoke retaliatory attacks like we have never seen before in the United States. And that's going to be very, very difficult to stop because we've got the United States military now spread in hot wars that they want to grow throughout all of Latin America. And the FBI, who's supposed to investigate terrorism, they're all getting pulled into this immigration raid stuff. So they're spread out. They cannot protect the homeland. So when you've got Donald Trump able to declare a unilateral war against a narco-terrorist group that is just south of our border, and you've got domestic law enforcement and law enforcement that are supposed to go out and get those cartels, instead distracted by like immigration stuff domestically, that is inviting cartel violence against the homeland, against American people, the likes of which the United States has not seen before. By violating the sovereignty of all of these nations, the Trump administration is planting the seeds of terrorism that generations moving forward will have to deal with. So if you haven't yet called your member of Congress and your senator to tell them to strip Donald Trump of the ability to do this, you need to do it now, because the price that we're going to pay is going to continue to grow exponentially as long as he is left unchecked, because creating crises overseas or over the border and crises here at home, that is what authoritarians do to strip away all civil rights and gain totalitarian control.
Members of the United States military are obligated not to follow Donald Trump or any president. They're obligated and take an oath, a sworn oath, to uphold the Constitution. And that means that if there is an illegal order or an order that violates the Constitution, when in doubt, they have to comply with the Constitution, and they have an obligation, our military does, our military officers do, to disobey unconstitutional, illegal orders that don't comply with congressional statutes or the Constitution itself. And that is from starting back in the very beginnings and foundings of our nation, and is also embodied in the Code of Military Justice under something that we refer to as the Nuremberg Principles, which come out of the Nuremberg trials after World War II, after the Holocaust, when the Nazi officers were put up, along with soldiers, that were put up in tribunals to be convicted of crimes. And they tried to argue, we were just following orders. The Nuremberg Principle, now embedded within the United States Code of Military Justice, says that is not a defense. You cannot follow an illegal, unconstitutional, ultra vires order. Now, Donald Trump thinks, as has been in the press in the last 72 hours, that a group of elected officials, many of them either in the military in the past, veterans, or members of the intelligence community, sending out a beacon, if you will, to the military that says you not only should not follow a illegal, unconstitutional order of this president, you have an obligation, an oath that you've taken to the Constitution to disobey that order. And why do they have to send out that beacon right now? They have to send out that beacon because Pete Hegseth has lopped off the heads of the military brass that would form a resistance, that would remind the troops of the Code of Military Justice, that would remind them that they need to follow the Constitution, not any man, not any president. And since we don't have the Mark Milley's anymore, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we don't have those people who would form a bulwark of resistance against an out-of-control president, then from the outside, we need to speak to the inside and remind them of their obligation. It is unconstitutional for a military officer or somebody that follows an officer rank and file to follow an unconstitutional act. So if Donald Trump says, shoot those protesters in the park at the White House, you have to refuse that order. If he says go seize the voting machines and there's no statutory law that allows him to do that, you have to ignore that. If he says interfere with the election, you must ignore it. I'm Michael Popak. You're here on Monday morning on Legal AF. I need to weigh in on this issue because it's getting worse for Donald Trump, not better. So take a moment, hit the free subscribe button, and help us continue to grow this pro-democracy channel. Now we've got the video clip for you first, and then I'll react to it and show you some other videos, other receipts that I brought to show you we're dealing with an enemy from within, an enemy domestic against the Constitution if Donald Trump were to continue to give ultra vires unconstitutional orders. So when Elise Slotkin and Mark Kelly and other members of the other veterans elected officials and members of the intelligence community put together this next video clip, it drove Donald Trump crazy and has him calling for their execution, for them to be hanged, for them to be found in treason and sedition, when it's the exact opposite. Donald Trump doesn't understand the supremacy clause of the Constitution. He doesn't understand the Nuremberg principles. He doesn't understand.
Thank you guys for listening to the clips. Now it's my time to do a proper analysis because, guys, in this case, according to our title today, it means that for so many years, America's defense industry has always been operating like a closed club. I mean, you see these clubs that are enclosed, you don't know so much about them, and it's only a small group but containing massive contractors. There has been rising costs, delayed projects, and weapons a system that take years longer and billions more than promised. And no matter what happens, the checks keep coming. I mean, checks, I hope you understand by that. But this time round, the president is signaling something very different. He doesn't want negotiations. He does not want quiet warnings. He wants an ultimatum. So according to the president's message, the demand is very simple. He wants faster delivery, lower costs, end of wastages, or you just risk being cut out. Only those. So his argument is straight to the point. If the Pentagon cannot pass an audit, if the taxpayers cannot see where the money is going, then why should the defense contractors keep cashing blank checks? In his words, in President's words, that's what I mean. America's military must be strong. But in this case, strong does not mean overpricing items, or overpricing tenders. So it's not just about talking here and there or tough talks here and there. Those contractors that have been working under the defense ministry are some of the most powerful players in the United States of America's government, because in most cases they are the ones who fund campaigns, they are the ones who influence policies, and they are the ones that employ millions and millions of Americans. So challenging them is not something very easy. It's not like challenging a tech company or a media outlet or as an influencer. So it's actually challenging them in this case means that you are challenging the backbone of the military industrial system, tough, right? So that's what the ultimatum mean in this particular case. Anyway, the MAGA supporters, for them, they see this situation as long overdue. I mean, they really wanted somebody to come and talk about this, and finally the president is talking about it. MAGA supporters are saying that Americans are paying more than any other country for defense. They are funding the defense ministry more than any other country in the world. Yet costs keep rising, accountability keeps disappearing. So to MAGA supporters, the president is not attacking the military, but is defending their taxes, and the soldiers, on the other hand, they are also being protected and being defended. So the soldiers also, they actually deserve better equipment that actually works. So the MAGA supporters' message is very simple. They just want a strong military that is spending smartly. That is their only message, or what they want. So opponents on the other side, they are talking. It's not like they are not talking, by the way. But for them, they are warning of possible risks. They are saying that aggressive ultimatums could actually disrupt supply chains. It could slow weapon production and it could actually create uncertainty during global tensions. For the opponents or for those who don't or non-MAGA supporters, they believe that some fear that politics is being mixed with the national security in this case, and others are asking questions like, is the president really serious about this situation, or is it a leverage for negotiations? So we don't know. Probably we could talk about the bigger picture here now, because this ultimatum, it actually comes in a certain pattern that the president has always been using since he got into office. We call it the Trump pattern. He instills pressure first, then he shocks the system. I mean, people get shocked about it, and finally he forces change by threatening the unthinkable. So we have seen this pattern working in the trade deals. We have seen this pattern working when he was actually saying that he was not going to fund NATO, and also now he's applying it when it comes to the defense contractors. So the message here is very loud and clear. For him, no institution is untouchable, So what's the real question that people really need to ask about the defense contractors in this case? Because, there are a lot of questions, but what do you think should be asked first? Will this ultimatum actually change how America build its military, or will the system bend and, snap back? Because, of course, if the president tends to follow through this, I mean, it could reshape defense spending for generations to come. So, in this case, if he doesn't manage to achieve what he wants, it will actually prove to us that, these defense contractors, they are very powerful, they are untouchable. So, I don't know what you think about this entire story. I mean, I don't know if you see it as an accountability or an overreach. Kindly let me know in the comment section below. I'll appreciate your comments. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.